Hello everybody, welcome back to another Balatro video. Today we have something just a little bit different. Today I'm going to go through and rank all the decks in Balatro. On a recent video, somebody commented and asked for a tier list of both the decks and the jokers, so I'm going to be doing both of those. Today's going to be the decks, and if you want to see the jokers, all 150 of them, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that, and that video will come out tomorrow. But let's get started. So the first deck we have is the Abandoned deck. Now this deck, it's going to be 40 cards, and it's going to have no face cards. So there are some advantages to this deck where, you can draw 4 of a kinds, or full house is easier, and it really makes fixing your deck easier. Obviously, downside is no face cards. There are tons of jokers that have synergy with face cards that would be, great to have, but unfortunately you can't really use them. You can obviously get face cards in your deck if you want to. It's just not very efficient. I wouldn't really recommend it for the Abandoned deck. But I think it's a great deck overall. And for the Abandoned deck, I'm going to put it in the B. I think it's a nice deck. I think it has a good kind of basis on it. And I think it goes in the B. The next deck that we have is the Anaglyph deck. This deck, at the higher level, is pretty... I want to say useless, because you get a double tag for every boss line that you beat. That's the kind of basis behind the Anaglyph deck. And the only problem with that is that in the higher kind of skill, and I guess all players should be doing this, but you're really not skipping for tags, so that double tag usually does not get a lot of use. Sometimes I go through the Anaglyph deck with complete runs where it's just I don't use it at all. So it can be good in some scenarios, but overall I don't think it's that incredible. I like the idea of the deck. It can be very good, especially if you get like a late negative tag with, I don't know, 10 double tags. I think it can be very good, but for me personally, I'm gonna have to put this one into the C tier. Next up is the Black deck. The Black deck is notoriously the hardest deck in the game to win on, and that is because you don't have as many hands. You lose one hand size. Sorry, that's because you lose one hand. So every round you're done with, you don't get as much money. You don't get as much chances to score your hand or draw your hand if you're playing like a more difficult hand to find, and that's what makes it so hard. And usually, if you can get through the early game with a reliable hand and kind of make use of all 6 of those joker spots, you can usually beat it, but it is very hard, especially to get through the early game, and that's why I'm going to put it in the D tier. Next up is the Blue deck. This deck gives you +1 hand each round, and I think this is a very, very good deck. Obviously the +1 hand gives you more economy boosting for the early antes, and it helps get your economy going, and it makes it easier to play those hands and score more points because you have more hands. So because of this, I think that I'm gonna have to put this one in the A tier. I think it's a great deck, has really a lot of upside, not much downside at all. So yeah, that's gonna be the Blue deck. Next up down here we have the Checkered deck. The Checkered deck is, I'd like to say, I think it is very easy to win on. It has 26 spades and 26 hearts. So basically you take all the diamonds, turn them into hearts, all the clubs, turn those into spades. That's your Checker deck. And I think that it's very fun, especially if you like flushes. I think it's a great deck. I think it's very easy. You can play flushes the whole time and have no problem. So that's one of the upsides of this deck. There's not too many downsides to this deck. I think it's great. So I'm going to go ahead and put this one in A tier, because I think it is pretty easy to win on, pretty good to get you going, and obviously very easy to draw your hand, especially if you're playing a flush. The next deck that I'm going to go through is the Erratic deck. Now this is one of my least favorite decks in the game. Similar to Black deck, I'm not that much of a fan of it. It's kind of depends on, it's RNG based. You're kind of waiting to see what kind of cards and suits you get, and sometimes you have to reset a couple times just to get a favorable deck, and I'm Not really a fan of that. I like to, you know, go in there and have the same deck every time. It can be good, like in some scenarios. I know there's one seed where there's 52 tens of spades. Obviously, in that scenario, it's very good because you have your entire deck is just one card. But we're not. That scenario does not happen ever. So I'm gonna have to put this one in the C tier. Next up, we have the Ghost deck. So this one, you are going to start with a Hex card, and Spectral cards can appear in the shop. Personally, this is my favorite deck. I love this deck. I got probably most of my gold stickers for my Jokers for Completionist Plus on this deck, because I think it is very easy to win. That early Hex, even if you don't hold on to that Joker, it's very helpful getting through the early antes. That times 1.5, and also you know, those spectral cards that appear in the shop can be incredibly useful. You know, spectral cards are obviously, they're supposed to be the best cards in the game, and they are most of the time. So with this deck, it's kind of easy to get your hand down to what you want, or your deck down to what you want. It's easy to play high scoring hands, especially with that Hex. You know, you get aura in there to make your cards a little bit better. So I think that that's definitely my favorite deck, and one of the better ones in my opinion. So obviously I might be a little biased here, but I'm going to put this one in the S tier because it is my favorite deck, and I think there's so much upside to this deck. So yeah. Next up, we have the green deck. This deck, you get $2 for every hand that you don't use at the end of the round, and $1 for every discard you do not use at the end of the round. Personally, I'm not that big of a fan of this one. I like using all my discards and getting the hand that I want, so it is kind of limiting, I guess. You can't really search for the cards that you want, and also an interesting thing about this, you get no interest. So in regular Balatro runs, you want to try and keep your money above the $25 threshold, and that's kind of difficult sometimes. So, I mean, once you get up there, it's pretty easy to hold it up. But with the green deck, you don't really get to take advantage of that, and it does get hard to, you know, make sure you're getting economy in it all the time, because obviously you don't get any interest. So sometimes it requires an economy Joker, like, I don't know, Golden Joker or the Rocket, or even a business card if you're playing face cards. And it's kind of hard to get your economy going in this deck, I think. But once you get it going, it's not too bad. Definitely not one of the worst decks we have. So I'm going to put this one in the B tier. Next up, we have the Magic deck. Now, the Magic deck is, you start with 2 copies of the Fool, and you start with Overstock, Planet Tycoon, and Tarot Tycoon. So, first shop, you see you already have 2 Fools, and you know there's probably some Tarot cards, probably some Planet cards in there. I think this deck can be nice. I mean, it's very nice to start with the Overstock. It is very nice. You're able to really go and hunt for those Jokers that you need early game. So I think that's, you know, a very important part of the game, is finding the Jokers you need, and Overstock really helps with that. So that is nice. I'm gonna say that it's a decent deck. I'm not gonna say it's good. I'm not gonna say it's bad. I'm gonna say it's pretty middle of the road. I'm gonna put it in B tier, but I do like one of the starts where you get 1 Judgment and then you use 2 more, and you start with 3 Jokers just from Judgment cards. I think that's a great start. I think it's a pretty funny start. So yeah, we're gonna put that one in B tier. Next up, we have the Nebula deck. The Nebula deck, you start with a Telescope voucher, but you only get 1 consumable slot. So there is an upside in that you pretty much, you know, you start with the Nebula deck, so you get to kind of play whatever hand you want, and you start with it, and you get that Planet card every time, if you can obviously start with it. And that's the upside. The only downside is that you only get 1 consumable slot. So there, I mean, it is a pretty big downside. If you get the, gosh, I don't remember, Spectral Globe maybe? Spectral something. Maybe that's not right. Can't remember what that voucher is called, but it's before the Omen Globe. If you get that one, then you can, you know, get your consumable size back up to 2. But the 1 consumable size is very limiting. You don't get to take tarot cards into the deck, so you only get 1 of those. again, it's probably like a death or a hangman, and that's not really great. You want to have both of those slots open so that you can bring tarot cards in and really shape your deck the way you want to. So that is a big disadvantage, but the telescope is a big advantage in that you can play and really level up your hands quickly. So I'm going to put this one in the B tier. Next up, we have the painted deck. This one is +2 hand size, so you'll start with a hand size of 10, and -1 joker slot, so you only get 4 jokers for most of the run. This deck is pretty difficult, I'd say, although it is a little bit easier to draw your hands. That extra 2 hand size does help quite a bit. So I'm going to go ahead and put this one in B tier. This deck doesn't allow for as much potential into Endless because you're limiting to your jokers, and that's obviously where most of your scoring is coming from. But it does have a pretty big upside in that, you know, you get to draw your hands a little bit easier. So I think I'm going to put that one in B tier. I think it's a fantastic deck. Definitely some upside, but again, it could use a little work. Definitely not my favorite deck. Definitely one of the harder decks. So that's what I think about the painted deck. Next up, we have the plasma deck. This one, it balances your chips and molt after you score points. So if you have 100 chips and 0 molt, it would go to 50 chips and 50 molt. Multiply that, it's like 2,500 or something. So obviously, if you can get your chips up, it's very easy, especially for white stake. But that doesn't work as well for gold stake. So I guess one of the strategies for this deck is going to be to focus on chips early. Probably get, you know, a few chip jokers, like Wee Joker's very good, Bull. Even the square joker can be viable on this deck, which isn't usually viable on other decks. And then around ante 4, maybe 5, you want to try and start to shift over to molt, and that's how you really get those runs going into Endless, and that is obviously very important. You want to get those runs going into Endless as quick as you can. So the quicker you rely on molt, especially like molt on card triggers and re-triggers, you can get the plasma deck up to some crazy numbers. My best run on the plasma deck was E to the 98, so definitely very up there. So yeah, obviously plasma deck, everybody saw it coming. That's going to the S tier. Probably the best deck in the game. So yeah. Next up, we have the red deck. It is similar to the blue deck, not as much upside. Instead of +1 hand, you get +1 discard. So it does help you kind of be able to draw those hands easier, but it's not as, I guess, not as good for your economy because you're not getting that extra $1 per hand. Instead, it's just a discard. You're gonna might as well use it, or else it's no point in holding on to them. So I will say it's a little bit worse than the blue deck, not quite as good. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this one in the B tier because again, it's similar to the blue deck, just not as good. So yeah, that's where the red deck is going. Next up, we have the yellow deck. This is gonna be, wow, I cannot think of this. You're going to start with extra $10. So you're going to start with $14 instead of the original $4. This deck is very good because you kind of get your economy going very early. And your economy is it is the most important thing in Balatro. You really have to get that economy going early and allow you to re-roll, look for those jokers you need, look for the deck fixing you need. So those extra $10 at the beginning can be extremely helpful and really help kickstart your run exactly how you want it to go. For that reason, I'm going to have to put this one into the A tier. Lastly, we have the Zodiac deck. The Zodiac deck is very okay. It has Overstock, which is incredibly good for looking for your jokers and really getting your run kicked off. But it also comes with Planet Merchant and Tarot Merchant, which can be good, can also hinder you a little bit and not really allow you to see as many jokers. So it is kind of important to be able to see those jokers, obviously. But I think it's a good deck. I think that having those 3 vouchers at the start can really help kickstart your run, level up those hands, get that deck down, get your money up, and I think it's very important, obviously, to have that overstock. It is one of the best vouchers in the game, so it is incredibly strong because of that reason. But the Tarot Merchant and Planet Merchant both kind of bring it down a little bit, so that one is going to go into the B tier. lastly, I was wrong by the magic deck about what it did. So you actually start with 2 copies of the Fool and the Crystal Ball voucher, which gives you +1 consumable slots. Everything else I said is true. You know, Judgment, still one of the funniest starts in the game, where you get 3 judgments. I just read that wrong. It's still gonna be in the B tier. But yeah, sorry about that. Accidentally messed that up. Yeah, that is gonna be my tier list out of all the decks. So just to recap, in S we have the Ghost deck and Plasma deck. In A we have the Blue deck, Checker deck, and Yellow deck. In B, which most of our decks are, we have the Abandoned deck, Green deck, Magic deck, Nebula deck, Painted deck, Red deck, and Zodiac deck. In the C tier, we have the Anaglyph deck and the Erratic deck, and in the D tier, of course, we have the Black deck. Not good. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Maybe learned something. You know, I try and help give as much advice as I can while I'm doing this. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. And if you want to see that Joker's tier list, it'll be out tomorrow. So I hope you guys enjoy that as well. Make sure you subscribe and like if you enjoyed this video. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time.